Dr. Lindsey Burke is the director of the Center for Education Policy at the Heritage Foundation and the Mark A. Kolokotrones Fellow in Education Policy. I'm sure that I mispronounced that. Lindsey, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So, first question. Joe Biden says, I'm going to forgive all these student loans. Nancy Pelosi, back in April, says the president doesn't have the right to forgive all of these student loans. Who's right?
Well, look, I never thought I would say this, but I have to agree with Nancy Pelosi. There was a legal memo from the Office for General Counsel at the Department of Ed 2 years ago that said that the secretary does not have the statutory authority to cancel, compromise, discharge, or forgive on a blanket or mass basis principal balances of student loans. That's pretty clear cut. And so I think they are on dubious legal grounds, and I'm confident we'll see some challenge moving forward.
Now, what will the effect of that challenge be? Because I'm reminded of Andrew Jackson and Justice Marshall. You know, Marshall gives his decree from the Supreme Court, and Andrew Jackson may or may not have said, Justice Marshall has given his judgment, now let's see him enforce it. So sure, maybe we get a legal challenge, maybe some court comes and says, okay, Biden doesn't have the right to do that. Well, when is that going to occur? How long after he's already, practically speaking, forgiven all the student loans?
Right. Well, this is an open question right now, and I don't think we know the answer. But what we do know is that what happened yesterday with the administration now planning to, forgiveness is a misnomer, right? They're just shifting the debt onto all American taxpayers. But this plan is going to further inflate college costs. It's going to hinder economic growth. It's going to reward upper income earners. And of course, it's going to provide a major handout to these woke institutions of higher education. And it really is just the epitome of unfair policy, because so many individuals made a conscious decision not to attend college to avoid exactly this debt. And yet they're being handed somebody else's bill. So it really is just foisting somebody else's debt onto all American taxpayers and forcing middle-income Americans who did not or could not attend college to pay off the loans that somebody else took out. So it really is, it's just the height of unfair policy.
But isn't there a response that we'll get from the libs here, which is conservatives talk all the time about how the rich pay pretty much all of the taxes in America, and people who graduate from a four-year college are more likely to make more money. And so, yes, as a matter of optics, you have the majority of Americans who don't go to college or graduate from a four-year college, paying off the student loans of this minority of Americans who do graduate from a four-year college and tend to make more money. But practically speaking, it's probably just the college graduates paying off these bills anyway, right? Because the college graduates are more likely to be wealthy.
Yeah, more likely to repay. But I think there are so many moral hazards that this is creating that is going to throw all of this out of whack moving forward. Why would anybody ever pay on their loans again? Right now, you are currently getting what is effectively an interest-free loan due to this pause on repayments, and then massive chunks of loan balances are being transferred on to somebody else. So why would you save? Why would you contribute to your kid's 529? Why would you plan on repaying in the future? And then, of course, it goes without saying, but universities are going to capture all of this largesse. They're going to increase tuition moving forward because they know these federal subsidies are likely to continue in the future. And then students are going to borrow the maximum amount that they can and likely attend a more expensive university than they would have otherwise in anticipation that their loans will be forgiven in the future. And I think one frequently overlooked aspect of this is the continued pause on repayments. This pause, as expensive as the so-called forgiveness is, we know it's going to cost at least $570 billion. As expensive as that is, the pause on repayments is costing $5 billion per month. And that was just extended through December, through the end of December. So this is not only incredibly expensive, but the pause is probably the most regressive component because doctors and lawyers are benefiting the most from not having that interest accrue on their high levels of student loan debt.
What do you think the end game is here? Do you think that this is just an old, Chicago machine style, pay off the voters that you want to vote for you in November? Or is this part of a broader strategy to make college free for everybody, as some of the more left-wing Democrats have been campaigning on for years?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. You have to ask yourself why this particular type of debt, right? There is so much debt out there for so many things beyond college, right? The owner-operator truck driver who took out a $150,000 loan to be able to buy his own rig so that he could earn more down the road. Why should he have to pay off the student loan of a college-going counterpart who, statistically speaking, could earn more than him down the road? Why not the debt of the auto loan of the Uber driver, right? Somebody had tweeted, my mortgage now identifies as a student loan. So there are so many different types of debt that are out there. It begs the question, why this particular type? And I think the only answer is because this is a politically favorable constituency. But you're also right in that this is the first step toward what the left ultimately wants, which is free higher education to really extend the K-12 system into a K-16 system, which of course accrues to the bottom line of teachers unions and the left broadly, this army of diversicrats that are now employed in both higher ed and K-12 education.
I'm really torn on what to do about it because I know that a lot of conservatives say, college is stupid, don't go. And it is not lost on me that while we have lots of people at the Daily Wire with lots of very fancy college degrees, the three people who have ever signed my paycheck, not one of them has a college degree. All the people at the very, very top did not go to college and just sort of worked very hard and were very smart and created a very successful company. And then the people who received the checks, we all went to the fancy schools and the big name brand universities. So I'm not suggesting that you have to go to college to make a lot of money. And actually, some of the most interesting entrepreneurs have dropped out or didn't go at all. But all of that said, I think college can be good. I really like liberal education. I break with the conservatives who say people should just study engineering, study something useful to help you get a job. I think that's insane. I think the only reason you should go to college is to read dusty old books of poetry. I think you should never take a practical vocational class in college. There's vocation training and trade schools for that. The point of a liberal education is to make sense of your freedom, cultivate cultivate culture, and know about your culture, and train your rational will. And so I really want to support college and liberal education specifically on the one hand. And then on the other, I look on the campuses and I say, people aren't getting that anywhere. I mean, they're not getting that at Harvard. They're not getting that anywhere in America. So what do we do about that?
Yeah, you're right. And we have created an incentive structure that tells young Americans that their only way to climb the path of upward economic mobility in America is through a 4-year brick and mortar college. And I agree with you. We have sold higher education purely in economic terms and really focused on some of what should be the domain of trade schools and apprenticeship programs. And so I think I'm 100% with you. There is all the value in the world in getting a liberal arts education. But right now we're at a point where the federal government, the federal taxpayer, is financing, they're originating and servicing and directly providing 93% of all student loans. And so when that whatever choice doesn't pay off for an individual student and they default or more of this loan forgiveness, debt shifting occurs, that means the burden is being borne by American taxpayers. There is no bank that is picking up the tab for this. The bank is me and you. It's the American taxpayer. And so every incentive that is, part of the higher education structure right now is out of whack, from the financing to what is being taught to the way that universities spend their money. And speaking of Harvard, Harvard is sitting on an endowment of over $50 billion. Right. If they really cared about the plight of students, these poor Harvard law grads, then they would tap into that endowment and help lower the cost of tuition.
Now, that's such a good point. And my inner communist comes out when I look at these schools that are playing a large role in the destruction of our country. And I say, seize the endowments, eat the rich, let's go, let's do it. But you're doing it to us, let's do it to these guys. So I totally feel that. Now, I've got this argument that I would often make to conservatives when they ask me, should I go to college? And I say, in most cases, probably not. And for most colleges, probably not. Now that's a harder argument to make, because one of the chief arguments against going to college is you're going to take out $250,000 in debt and you're not going to really have a lot to show for it other than you went to some fun parties for 4 years, you did a lot of stuff you shouldn't do, and you're probably more ignorant than you were when you started. Now, though, if college is either going to be greatly reduced in cost or practically free, because they can take out as much debt as they want, they can expect not to pay it back, then why shouldn't students go to college and have a fun party for 4 years and not have to pick up the tab?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is all part of the moral hazard that this has created. People will make suboptimal decisions that they would not otherwise have made because of this free money that is now out there associated with higher education. And if we take a step back, we know what happens when countries try to make college free at the point of delivery. They end up having to ration seats. We saw this in the United Kingdom in the 90s, and then they eventually reinstituted tuition fees because they didn't want to have to ration seats. And so we know when big government gets involved with trying to finance and to provide higher education subsidies at an even greater rate, that all of these bad incentives are created, not the least of which is that universities are going to continue increasing tuition. If you look over the past 30 years, we know that total federal aid has increased about 300%. What did universities do in response? They more than doubled their tuition in real terms. And of course, this is what they're going to continue to do. We've known that for a long time. It's the old Bennett hypothesis that Reagan's education secretary put forward all the way back in 1987. And that has really turned, I think, into a truism. And, last thing on that, there was a study that the New York Federal Reserve Bank put out a few years ago that found that for every additional dollar in subsidized student loans, universities raised their tuition about 60 cents. In other words, they're just capturing all of these additional subsidies and they're not passing it along to students in the form of reduced tuition or increased salaries. They're hiring additional DEI staff or amassing more real estate. So they're not spending it in a responsible way, and we're likely to see that continue.
Do you think that in the short term, this political gamble will work? I'm talking about midterm elections. Biden and the Dems are underwater on pretty much every single issue. COVID, sometimes they pop above sea level, but not very often. So this is it. They're trying to buy a bunch of votes. Does it work?
Look, I think it's a numbers game. I mean, we have to keep in mind that only 1/3 of Americans have bachelor's degrees. Far, far fewer have graduate degrees. And so that third, if he's not winning over votes among that third, which that could be a third where he was already doing pretty well, I don't think that it's actually going to move the needle very much. Most Americans look at this and say, this is incredibly unfair. I either worked my way through college or I graduated college and lived modestly so that I could repay my student loans that I agreed to pay back. I didn't go out to fancy dinners or, didn't go on European vacations. I mean, this is what I think the average American taxpayer is thinking right now. And if you scrimped and saved to pay for your college or to pay for the college of your child, and all of a sudden, you're seeing the Biden administration with a stroke of the pen, by the way, what is probably going to be the most expensive stroke of a pen in history, just hand somebody else's debt to you after you responsibly saved or responsibly paid off your student loans. That is just the most frustrating thing you can imagine. So I think that they have underestimated how this will ultimately play out in November.
It does feel a little bit like late stage empire. I know conservatives always want to compare everything to the fall of Rome, but it does feel a little bit like that moment you see at the end of empires where people are just plundering the treasury. As they say, well, if I don't take the money, the other guy's going to take it. And when that happens, political problems can accelerate very quickly. Lindsey, thank you so much for coming on the show. People can find you, I take it, at the Heritage Foundation. Anywhere else on social media?
That's right. I'm at Lindsey M. Burke. You can also find me at the Educational Freedom Institute as well.
Excellent. That's wonderful. Lindsey, I can't wait. When we have you back on next time, I assume it will be, amid the ruins of America's educational system, and we can figure out where to go from there. Lindsey, thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Right now, head on over to rockauto.com. The value of your minivan, pickup, sedan, whatever you drive, probably appreciated pretty significantly last year. That's the silver lining amid all the crazy supply chain stuff and the record inflation. It means you got to take care of your automotive investment. Keep more of your money by buying the auto parts that you need to maintain and repair your vehicle at rockauto.com. Rockauto.com has been in the auto parts business for 20 years. It's family owned, super easy to navigate catalog, always reliably low prices, no gimmicks. You're not going to beat their price anywhere. It doesn't matter the day of the week. Same prices for pros and do-it-yourselfers. I've told you about my buddy. I'm going to shame him again. My buddy, who he really likes Rock Auto, but he was just feeling a little loose one day. He goes to the brick and mortar auto parts store. He just wanted to get a part. They find the part finally. They wanted to charge him $400. He pulls up Rock Auto. was $150 on Rock Auto. He said, you scammers, you're trying to rip me off over here. I'm going back to Rock Auto. Go to rockauto.com. Get brakes, shocks, carpet wipers, headlights, mirrors, mufflers, lug nuts, or any other part that you need. rockauto.com. Be sure to write Knowles, Knowles, in their How Did You Hear About Us box so they know that we sent you. I'm glad you liked that clip. Now, look, we have over 1 million subscribers. I want 1 quintillion. I do, and I'm not going to stop until I get it. So ring that bell, subscribe. We'll see you next time.